It was Thanksgiving evening. While I was sharing a memory about George, my late husband, my daughter cut me off. Just shut up. Mom, nobody cares about your poor stories from the 70s. In front of everyone, my chest went cold. Have you ever sacrificed everything for someone 25 years? Every dollar, every dream, only to realize they see you as nothing but an inconvenience. That night, something inside me broke. What I did next would change everything, but to understand why, I need to take you back to the day George died, and the promise that started it all. The smell of lavender always lingered in my house. It mixed with the faint trace of old paper, as if time itself had soaked into the walls. In the quiet mornings, I would sit by the window, light spilling across the kitchen table, and hold the wedding photograph of George and me. His hand rested on my shoulder, his smile soft, the way he always smiled when he believed life could only get better from here. Sometimes I whispered to that photograph, as if it still carried his warmth. George has been gone for 25 years, but the day he left still feels near enough to touch. It was an ordinary afternoon. He had been fixing a loose shutter, humming a tune from our younger days. I heard a thud, a sound that didn't belong in our peaceful world, and then silence. By the time I reached him, his face had already gone pale. The paramedics said heart attack, the kind that takes a man before he even knows to be afraid. That night, after the house went quiet, I locked myself in the bathroom. I remember the chill of the tiles under my feet, the mirror clouded by steam. My reflection looked like a stranger's, a woman stripped of color, holding onto the sink to keep from falling apart. My breath came in shallow waves, each one cutting deeper than the last. And in that trembling hour between despair and determination, I made a promise to the woman staring back at me. Cassandra will never know want, I whispered. She will have everything we never had. It wasn't just a vow. It was an anchor, something to keep me from drifting into the same emptiness that had taken George away. I believed love could be rebuilt through sacrifice, that devotion could fill the space death left behind. The next morning, I went back to work at the Central Public Library. The fluorescent lights buzzed above me like restless thoughts. My job had always been a comfort, a place of quiet order, where stories stayed, where you put them, and endings made sense. But after George's death, it became my battlefield. I volunteered for every shift. The long hours numbed my grief. The ache in my back replaced the ache in my chest. I worked until my hands trembled when I stamped the due dates, until my feet swelled against the edges of my shoes. Each night, when the lights dimmed and the last visitor left, I would rest my forehead against the counter and whisper, "For Cassie." I wore the same navy blue uniform every day. When the fabric thinned, I patched it by hand beneath the yellow glow of a kitchen lamp. I stopped accepting invitations from friends' no birthdays, no Sunday gatherings, no quiet evenings. In gardens that once brought me joy, books and routine became my entire life. I convinced myself it was noble, even holy, to let my own happiness fade if it meant my daughter's would burn brighter. Every dollar I earned found its way into a small envelope hidden behind the family dictionary on the highest shelf. On the front, written in blue ink that had started to fade, were the words Cassie's Future Fund. Sometimes, I'd take it down late at night, unfold the bills one by one, and imagine the life they would buy for her. I never thought of what it cost me. Years passed, and Cassie grew. She was clever, graceful, quick with words. When she spoke, it felt as though the world listened. I lived for her laughter, for the sound of her pencil scratching against paper as she studied. And when the letter from Columbia University arrived, I almost couldn't breathe. She burst through the front door, her face glowing, waving the envelope like a banner. "Mom, I got in," she said. The sunlight behind her turned her hair into gold, and for a moment, I saw George's smile on her face. I hugged her tight and whispered, "You did it, sweetheart." What I meant was, we did. That night, the house filled with silence again. I sat at the kitchen table with a stack of bills and a notepad, running my finger down the list of costs. Tuition, dormitory fees, books, meals, travel. The numbers blurred together, cruel and cold. The savings in the envelope were not enough. I drained my insurance, my retirement fund, everything George and I had planned for our twilight years. And when that still wasn't enough, I walked into the bank and signed for a personal loan. The clerk looked at me with pity. "Are you sure?" "Mrs. Hayes, that's a lot to take on at your age." I smiled gently. "Sacrifice is not a loss." I told him, "It is your breath." He didn't understand what I meant, but I did. Every signature on those forms felt like another piece of my heart torn free, and yet I signed them all without hesitation. When I mailed the first tuition payment, I stood outside the post office for a long moment, watching the envelope disappear through the slot. I imagined it flying toward her, carrying my love like a second heartbeat. I came home to a quiet house that night. I brewed tea, sat beside George's photograph, and told him everything. "She's going to New York," I said softly. "She's going to be someone." The photo caught the last glint of light before the sunset, and for a moment, it felt like he smiled. The years that followed blurred together more shifts, more exhaustion, less of me left to give, but I didn't mind. I believed that one day, when Cassie stood in her cap and gown, all this invisible work would shine through her success. Love, I thought then, was giving until there was nothing left to give. I didn't yet understand that love without boundaries can slowly erase the one who gives it. I only knew the quiet satisfaction of keeping my promise, even as it hollowed me out. And so, every morning, when the light crept through the curtains and the smell of lavender rose from the sheets, I would pick up that wedding photo again. George's smile still told me everything would be worth it. And I would whisper back, "She will never know want. My love, never." But beneath the calm of those words, a small, unspoken truth waited. One, I wasn't ready to face. That in giving my daughter everything, I had begun to vanish from my own life. The day Cassie graduated from Columbia, I sat on the far edge of the crowd beneath a white canopy that shimmered in the spring sun. The stage was so distant I could only make out a moving blur of gowns and mortarboards. Yet I knew my daughter's stride instantly confident. Precise, like she owned the very ground beneath her feet. When her name was called, my hands trembled from clapping too hard. I wanted her to see me, to find my face in the sea of strangers, to know that I was still there. But she didn't look. Not once. I stayed seated long after the ceremony ended, watching the graduates spill into the streets with their proud parents, arms full of flowers, laughter spilling into the wind. I had brought a small bouquet of lilies, George's favorite. They wilted quietly in my lap as I waited, just in case she turned around. She never did. Months later came her wedding lavish, dazzling. Everything I had never been able to give her. The ceremony took place in the Hamptons, beneath a silk tent glowing with fairy lights. The air smelled of roses and expensive champagne. Daniel, her groom, was a lawyer with a sharp suit and sharper ambition. I stood quietly near the back, a faded figure among glittering guests. When they raised their glasses to toast the future, I smiled, as if I belonged. No one noticed the envelope I placed discreetly on the gift table, a check for nearly everything I had left in my account. I told myself it was an act of love, not desperation. I was the silent sponsor of her happiness. Invisible, but essential. When Cassie kissed my cheek, after the reception, her perfume clung to me long after she walked away. 5 years later, the phone rang at dawn. Her voice was brittle, tangled with tears. "Mom," she said, "I have nothing left. The apartment's gone. The job's gone. Daniel? He left." I didn't think. I just drove. The roads blurred past like pages in a book I already knew by heart. When I reached her, she looked smaller than I remembered, sitting among boxes and broken dreams. I gathered her into my arms, smoothing her hair like I used to when she was a child. "It's all right," I whispered. "Come home." Back in my small suburban house, I tried to make everything comfortable for her. The rooms had aged with me, faded wallpaper, the faint smell of lavender still clinging to the curtains. Cassie looked around and sighed. "It's so dated." "Mom, you really live like this," I laughed softly, though something inside me sank. "It's not much, but it's home." She barely smiled. Within a week, she insisted on modernizing everything. "That gas stove is ancient," she said, "and this bathroom I can't even think in here." So I used what remained of my retirement fund to replace the stove with a sleek induction cooktop and transform my little bathroom into what she called her private spa. The tile was imported, the fixtures gleaming, all for her comfort. I told myself I was giving her a fresh start, that this was temporary, but the house no longer felt like mine. Then came the day she pointed at George's armchair, the one worn smooth by years of my reading and his quiet evenings. "That thing has bad energy," she said, "dirty and old-fashioned. We should get rid of it." I froze. The chair was the last piece of him I had left. I opened my mouth to protest, but she was already dragging it toward the door. The sound of the legs scraping against the floor tore through me. I could have stopped her. I didn't. After that, something in me went quiet. She slept late, left her dishes in the sink, and called out, "Mom, could you do this as if I were her housekeeper?" I waited for her to find a job, to regain her footing, but she never seemed in a hurry. One evening, as I folded laundry in the dim light of the living room, she appeared at the doorway with her phone in hand. "Mom, I need a little money," she said. "It's just for this business course I'm taking online. You want me to get back on my feet, don't you?" I hesitated. "I don't have much left. Cassie, that's my emergency fund, my medical savings." She rolled her eyes. "What are you saving that money for? You're already retired. Isn't that your ultimate purpose, to help me?" Her words stung more than she knew. I wanted to tell her that I had spent my entire life helping her, that my purpose had become my prison. But instead, I nodded and wrote another check. The next week, it was for investment opportunities, then for a professional networking retreat. The money left faster than it had ever arrived. She promised to repay me, but I knew she wouldn't. The house changed in small, painful ways. My teacups vanished, replaced with her designer mugs, my shelves filled with her clutter, her perfume lingering where my lavender once was. I told myself it was fine, that it was only temporary. But each night, when I passed the empty space where George's chair once stood, I felt the hollow widening. Sometimes I caught her looking at me, not with love or gratitude, but with impatience, as if I were a burden she had inherited instead of a mother who had saved her. I would smile anyway, because that's what mothers do. We smile through the hurt, believing that kindness will one day be enough. But the house had grown smaller, my world. once filled with books and quiet purpose, now echoed with her footsteps and demands. I learned to step aside, to let her walk ahead. I learned silence again, the same silence I had once used to survive grief. Only this time, it was not death I was mourning. It was the slow erasure of myself, one small concession at a time. The days began to blend into each other, soft, gray, and heavy with silence. Cassie spent most of her mornings in bed and her afternoons glued to her phone, scrolling through other people's lives. I would try to start small conversations, but she rarely looked up. When I asked how her day was going, she answered with a distracted fine, her fingers still moving over the glowing screen. Sometimes, when her friends came over, she would lower her voice, and I could sense their quiet amusement, small smirks shared over wine glasses, and whispers that never included me. I told myself I was imagining it, but deep down, I knew I wasn't. One afternoon, I decided to bake George's old pumpkin pie recipe. It was something we used to do every Thanksgiving. Long before Cassie was born, I could still picture him in the kitchen, dusted with flour, humming that off-key tune while I laughed at his crooked crusts. I thought maybe, just maybe, bringing back that scent would fill the house with something warmer than tension. When I placed the pie on the counter to cool, Cassie walked in. She wrinkled her nose, her voice laced with mockery. "It's cute that you still cling to that recipe. Mom, don't you realize those flavors are obsolete? No one eats that kind of thing anymore." Obsolete. The word clung to me like smoke. I wanted to tell her that the recipe wasn't about flavor, it was about memory. But she had already turned away. Opening the fridge, her attention gone as quickly as it came. From then on, she stopped calling the place our home. To her friends, it was always Ellie's house or the place where my mother stays. Not once did she call me the homeowner. It was as if my name had replaced my title, reducing me from mother to mere occupant. One rainy afternoon, I brought out the family photo album, the one with the worn leather cover and yellowing pages. Each photo was a small miracle, George holding baby Cassie in his arms. Our first Christmas together. My mother's garden. The old library staff gatherings. I placed it on the table beside her. "Remember this?" I asked. My voice, hopeful. She didn't even look up from her phone. "Oh, Mom, not now. Who wants to look at that old, dusty clutter? Put it away. You're too sentimental." The word sentimental stung like an insult. I held the album against my chest, feeling the sharp corners press into my heart. I wanted to remind her that these were the fragments of her own story, too. But instead, I walked back to my room and placed it on the nightstand beside George's photo. I sat there for a long time, staring at both, wondering when memory had become clutter. When Thanksgiving came, she announced that she would host a dinner for her important friends. A group of 10 people from her new social circle, all sharp suits and bright smiles. She told me not to worry, that she had hired a private chef to handle everything. "You can just make that potato soup you always do," she said lightly. "It'll be cute. Like a little tradition." Cute. Tradition reduced to novelty. The house filled with the aroma of roasted turkey and garlic butter. But it didn't feel like home. The lights were too bright. The laughter too loud. The music too modern. I stood at the stove, stirring my soup, the old wooden spoon creaking in my hand. When the guests arrived, I smiled politely, serving bowls of soup while they complimented Cassie on her beautiful place. She didn't correct them. When we finally sat down to dinner, I found myself at the far end of the long table, half in shadow, my chair slightly apart from the rest. I watched as Cassie entertained them with stories about her new projects, her trips, her friends. They listened eagerly, nodding, laughing, lifting their glasses to toast her. Every once in a while, someone would glance at me polite, but distant. I was decoration, not presence. During a lull in the conversation, I found a moment of quiet. The candlelight flickered against the crystal glasses, and for a fleeting second, it felt like the right time to speak. I remember one Thanksgiving. I began softly. When your father and I couldn't afford a real turkey, we had boxed mashed potatoes, and we laughed the whole evening about it. A few of her guests smiled kindly, but Cassie's expression changed. She set down her fork, her eyes narrowing. God, just shut up. Mom, she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the table like glass. You are so boring. Nobody cares about your poor stories from the 70s. The room fell silent. The candles flickered as if even the flames had flinched. My lips parted, but no sound came. I could feel every pair of eyes flick toward me, then quickly away. Cassie returned to carving the turkey, her face perfectly calm, her voice light. When one of her friends gave her a startled look, she shrugged. My mother is just like that. The laughter resumed. It was quieter now, cautious at first, then louder, spilling over like nothing had happened. I looked down at my plate. The soup had gone cold. My napkin slipped from my fingers and landed soundlessly in my lap. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't anger that filled me, it was something worse. Indifference. I had become invisible even in humiliation. I stood, the chair scraping softly against the floor. Excuse me, I whispered. I don't feel well. No one tried to stop me. No one even looked up. I walked down the hallway slowly, the echo of laughter chasing me like a cruel refrain. The smell of roasted turkey lingered in the air, thick and sweet. In the mirror by the door, I caught a glimpse of myself, small, pale, eyes hollowed by years of silence. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. The night sky stretched wide above me, stars hidden behind a thin veil of clouds. I walked past the garden where George's chair once stood, past the mailbox that still carried our shared name. The street was empty, the houses warm and glowing with life. Behind me, through the windows, I could still hear her laughter, bright and false, the laughter of someone who had forgotten where she came from. I stood there until the chill seeped through my bones. Then I turned away, stepping into the dark. For the first time in years, the silence didn't scare me. It felt like truth. I drove until the houses thinned, and the hum of tires became the only sound. The Ford Taurus beneath me had miles of memory in its seams. The fabric seat cushion molded to my shape like an old friend. I pulled under the leafless oak and sat with the engine ticking. The world outside a smear of sodium halos and drifting leaves. Through the window, my house glowed like a small island of pretend warmth, laughter spilling through the panes in muffled waves. It sounded obscene against the hollow in my chest. At first, the tears were sudden and hot, the sort that wrench the breath from you. They came in a ragged tide as I thought of all the invisible trade-offs that had woven my life into someone else's comfort. 25 years of nicked pleasures and unclaimed afternoons. The nights spent mending uniforms by lamplight. The small envelopes folded and slipped behind a dictionary. The signatures I had given without a second thought. All of it poured out of me in sobs that shook the steering wheel. Those tears burned clean. And then they ebbed. The wetness on my cheeks cooled, and the breath that had been ragged settled into a steadier rhythm. In that quiet after the storm, the grief did not melt so much as harden into something with an edge. It was terrible and strangely clarifying. The shape of my life, once blurry, with obedient love. Snapped into outline. I could see now that Cassie did not love me for the cost of what I had given. She loved only the conveniences it supplied. She had mistaken patient compliance for weakness and assumed she could bend me without consequence. That recognition did not feel like defeat. It felt like the removal of a veil. Enough. I whispered to the empty car, and the words did not tremble. They felt like a hinge sliding open. I had been quiet for too long. I had allowed my own voice to be worn thin by habit and hope. I had been patient because I believed endurance was virtue. But endurance had become a lock. It was time to find the key. I drove back while the party inside my house swelled and receded like a tide. The front door clicked behind me, and the warmth of the living room washed against my cold skin. Voices bubbled. Laughter sparkled. They did not notice me moving through the rooms. A silhouette that had learned how to be invisible. I kept my steps small and certain until I slipped into the spare bedroom, the one where I had shoved trunks and keepsakes to make space for Cassie's things. Under the bed, in the hollow, I had belatedly called a safe. The metal box waited. It was dented and ordinary. The kind of thing you buy at a hardware store and swear you will never lose. For years I had not opened it. For years it had been a bland repository for documents I answered, when asked with a distracted nod. Tonight it felt like a heart returning to rhythm. I dragged it free and set it on my lap. The lid scraped with a familiar sound that made the room smell of dust and paper. Inside were the pieces of my autonomy, the deed to the house in my name. Bank statements folded like small ships. The original life insurance policy, with George's name in a careful script. Ordinary paper. And yet each sheet felt charged as if someone had wired electricity through the ink. My fingers trembled as they traced the margins. In that gentle tracing, strength unfurled. It was not a loud power. It was the quiet, steady kind that comes from remembering you own something worth guarding. When Cassie had waved away George's chair as if it were trash, she had also waved away what it represented, years of love and stewardship. She had declared the past inconvenient, and in doing so, revealed how she measured people by their utility. The metal box clicked closed in my hands, and for a moment I let myself laugh. A small, incredulous sound. My daughter had thought of me as clutter. Fine. I would become a force she had not been prepared to meet. I did not want spectacle. I wanted precision. I wanted to rearrange what allowed entitlement to flourish without shouting a single complaint. The documents in my hands meant I could do this. I could move funds. I could alter beneficiaries. I could sell what no longer served me and buy a life I actually wanted. I could make the conveniences she counted on require her own work. I envisioned a quiet strategy, change names, redirect accounts, place the house where it could no longer be assumed to be hers, all while leaving no trace that would be easy to challenge. It would be deliberate and clean, the kind of justice that takes a steady hand rather than a tantrum. I thought of how the world often misunderstands silence. People assume the unmoving are weak or unaware, but silence can be a kind of preparation. I had been gathering facts and patience like kindling. Now they would become a careful, controlled blaze. I would be the one to decide how and when it burned. Folding the papers back into the metal box felt like folding the past into my palm. I did not rage. I did not plan theatrics. I simply allowed the knowledge of my capability to settle in me like a warming cloth. I closed the lid and slid the box beneath my coat, feeling its weight as comfort rather than burden. Before I left the room, I paused and looked down the hallway at the soft glow spilling from the living room. Faces turned toward each other. Voices rising in easy, untroubled conversation. For the first time in years, the sight did not hurt. It was merely information. I had been a vessel of giving for decades, and now I would become an agent of choice. I stepped out into the night and breathed deep. The cold air, a promise of a different kind of life. My daughter had wanted me to be silent. She would get her wish. But this time, my silence would not be surrender. It would be the answer I chose to give. I acted within 2 days of Thanksgiving. There was no hesitation left in me. Only a quiet steadiness I hadn't felt in years. The first call was to my lawyer. Mr. Keating, change the beneficiary of George's life insurance. I said, all of it goes to the George Hayes Scholarship Fund for poor library students. His pause was soft, almost pitying. And your daughter, he asked. She'll be fine, I replied, though I knew she wouldn't be. The next morning, I went to the bank. I withdrew every dollar from our joint emergency fund and moved it into a private account in my name alone. When the teller asked if I wanted to notify the cosigner, I smiled. No, she'll find out soon enough. The house came last. My house. Though Cassie had claimed it as hers. I called a realtor and listed it for sale, signing the papers without a single tremor. The walls seemed to sigh as I walked through them one final time. Every photo, every book, every memory would soon belong to strangers, and that was all right. By the end of the week, I was gone. The proceeds bought me a small condo in Sarasota. Florida white walls, sunlight, and the sound of the ocean through open windows. I left only a note on the kitchen counter, unsigned. Everything I needed to say, I've said over the last 68 years. From now on, my silence will be your answer. I am going to find a new life, one where I am not clutter. I closed the door and didn't look back. 3 days later, the calls began. Dozens at first, then 50. One after another. Cassie's voice filled the voicemail box, first annoyed, then panicked, then wild with rage. What the hell are you doing? You can't just destroy me like this. This is my house. You are so selfish and cruel. I listened to the last one, then deleted them all. The silence that followed felt cleaner than air. Now, in Sarasota, I rise with the morning light. The sea murmurs outside, soft and endless. I spend my afternoons volunteering at the local library, shelving books with steady hands. Some nights, I sit on the balcony with tea and let the wind brush through my hair like forgiveness. My daughter wanted me to be silent. She got her wish. My silence took away everything she took for granted, and it gave me my life back. For the first time in decades, I belong to myself. Sometimes, love loses its way in the noise of pride and expectation. I once believed that giving everything meant keeping love alive, but I learned that real love needs space to breathe. It cannot survive inside sacrifice that forgets the self. I remember standing on that balcony in Florida, the ocean humming beneath me, sunlight touching my face like forgiveness itself. In that stillness, I understood that silence isn't the absence of love, it's the place where it can finally speak the truth. My story isn't about revenge. It's about remembering that even after all the heartbreak, peace is still possible. If you're listening tonight, call the ones you love. Tell them thank you. Tell them you see them. Don't wait for silence to remind you of what really matters. And if this story touched your heart, please comment, share, and subscribe to Grandma Stories channel so we can keep remembering, together, what love truly means.